I said, wow, we need to find a place where, we can get our son evaluated or get tutoring. And I sent an email. It was probably like, 2 a.m. by this time. We'd read so many articles on this stuff. And I sent an email to Susan Barton. I'm like, oh, maybe we'll hear from her tomorrow. And literally within 5 minutes, I sent her this note. I said, we live in this sleepy little town in the north suburbs of Chicago called Lake Zurich. We're looking for a tutoring center somewhere near us for dyslexia where we can have our son tested. Do you have any recommendations that are within 50 miles? So she's out in, I think, California somewhere. She sends us an email back in 5 minutes. She's like, oh, Jim, pleasure to meet you. You're in luck. There's one just up the road on Quentin Road, and it's called the Quentin Road Dyslexia Solutions. It was almost as if like God put his hand on us and said, I'm going to help. It was amazing.
That's Jim Vaselopulos speaking of his son Spyro, who's dyslexic. And Jim's our guest on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Here's our host, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad to dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
So let's listen now to this informative conversation between Jim Vaselopulos and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with my friend Jim Vaselopulos of Lake Zurich, Illinois, who's the father of two, an engineer by education, an entrepreneur, business coach, and fellow podcast host. Jim, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure and an honor.
You and your wife, Dana, have been married for 23 years and are the proud parents of two, Emily, 17, and Spyro, 20, who has been challenged by dyslexia. Let's start with some background. Tell me, where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Let's see. I grew up in Glenview. I guess I was born in Chicago. I don't remember those days. Moved out to Glenview when I was very young. Grew up in the north suburbs of Chicago. Had a storybook childhood and a big Greek family, extended family, cousins, uncles, some family still in Greece, some family here. I guess doing all the ancestry and genealogy, DNA stuff. I'm pretty much a thoroughbred Greek and, very proud of my heritage, and it has enriched my life.
Excellent. Out of curiosity, what did your dad do?
My father is now in a nursing home, suffering from a little bit of dementia in his old age, but he's 92. He led a good life. He came to America, got educated, got a college degree, was doing accounting type work, had a hard time kind of finding gainful employment as a senior accountant or anything like that because, there was at the time discrimination against someone who had an accent and someone who had a name like Spyro Vasilopoulos. And he ended up spending some time in Canada, came back, and then opened up a liquor store with his brother. And they successfully ran that liquor store in the north side of Chicago for many years, paid for several college educations, and allowed us to raise a wonderful family in relative comfort and grace in Glenview, Illinois.
Well, thank you. It's not lost on me that he's 92. So you've enjoyed a good long relationship with your dad, not only as a young guy growing up, but as an adult and a father yourself.
Yeah.
I have this image when you said a big Greek family about the movie, A Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Yes.
Have there been some of those in your experience?
Oh, we have definitely had those weddings. We have definitely had, like, my wife's not Greek, so she got, indoctrinated into the family. The movie has more accuracies than inaccuracies. I would say that a couple of the inaccuracies that really upset my family, and most notably my mother and my aunts, were that they didn't think they treated the grandmother very well because elders are treated with the utmost respect in our family. And these are the inaccuracies. There was a non-stress on education, as if like education was a bad thing, which is the exact opposite. It's all about getting educated in our Greek heritage. It's like, go there and, get as many degrees as you can. And my aunts and my mother were very upset because they're like, we know how to make bundt cakes.
Yeah, well, it's a very entertaining movie, and
yeah.
So thanks for sharing. So going back to your dad, though, how would you describe your relationship with your dad?
I think it's like a lot of, if you look at the era, my dad worked a lot. He was an entrepreneur. He was always working. And he had a kind of a thankless retail type job where the hours were awful. I remember on holidays like Christmas, it was like, okay, let's get up and open up the presents early because Dad has to go to work because people are going to go to their Christmas parties. They're going to buy a bottle of wine or something on their way to the Christmas party. So, he worked a lot, and it was a very traditional kind of family structure where my mother stayed at home and took care of us and did a lot of the raising of us. But I think it's one of those very respectful relationships where, perhaps he didn't speak a lot, but when he spoke, it was profound. There was a tremendous amount of wisdom. He was a very fair and compassionate and loving man. And so he was very dutiful of fatherly advice and activities and things like that. But of the day, if you wanted to say like the 60s, 70s, 80s kind of parenting, like, was he on the sidelines when I played games? No, he was working, in that regard. Perhaps it wasn't the storybook TV, a Mike Brady father parenting figure, working from the home office. But, as far as Greek parents go, man, the best.
That's great. Thank you. So I'm sort of curious if there's a takeaway, something that always comes to mind when you think about your dad, an anecdotal story, perhaps.
Oh, yeah. Here's a really good one. I was at the University of Illinois studying engineering. I was the third kid to go to the University of Illinois. So by that time, my dad was tired of driving. I was driving one of the old family cars myself back and forth. And so I had it on campus. I think I was in my sophomore year, or maybe somewhere there. And I was struggling in engineering just because the curriculum was so tough there. But I was also not focused, and I was spending a little too much time having a good time in my fraternity. And my grades came back at one point. In the process, I had let the car's oil pan run dry, and I ruined the car, and it had to be junked. It was an old car, but I screwed up. And then I also screwed up by getting bad grades. And I came home, and before the grades came in, my dad's like, I really don't want to be driving you back and forth to school. Let's go buy you a car. And so we bought a car. And between the day when we bought it and when we were going to pick it up a few days later, my grades arrived. They were not good. They were awful. And I felt awful. I felt, 1 foot tall. I was apologetic. I was shamed. I got the lecture of, you're not sending you to go, treat this like a country club. This is your job. And I said, Dad, I don't want to get the car. I don't deserve the car. There's no part of me that has earned the right to have this car. And he goes, you're right. But that salesman who sold us the car deserves to get his commission. And we are going to buy that car. And every time you sit in there and you turn the key, you're going to think about how much you don't deserve it. And it's your job to deserve it. And, you think about that lesson, there's so much built into that lesson. It's not about me. It's about everyone. And I love that story.
Yeah, well, it's almost like a supply chain story, right? Where there's all these people that are part of that process, like you said. And what a great lesson to learn at an early age when, the stakes were relatively low when you look back on it.
At the time, it did not seem like the stakes were low.
That's why you'll never forget that.
I could have very easily taken over the liquor store. That could have easily been my future, and I did not want that to be my future.
Oh, thanks for sharing. That's a good one. So you mentioned you went to University of Illinois, and I'm sort of curious to know when you graduated, where did your career take you? How did you get to where you are today?
Through just a strange set of circumstances, I was able to get an opportunity to interview for a wonderful company by the name of Allen Bradley in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I got a job. Honestly, it was like a dream job. Academically, I probably didn't deserve this job, but it was a job designing robotic automation machinery. And it was just cool. And, I started there, met some wonderful people, got into it deep enough to realize I probably didn't want to do that the rest of my life. Was able to enter into their manufacturing management program and got into manufacturing management, learned quite a bit, got exposed to some computer stuff pretty early. And because at one point we were purchased by Rockwell Automation, that was a big defense contractor, we got access to some technology that defense contractors had, and they were introducing us to it. And one of those technologies was this thing called DARPANET, which was the precursor to the internet. And when I saw that, I thought, wow, this is cool. We can do some neat things. And we were actually building systems to like put the company phone book online. And because we could save the cost of printing phone books, and, you know, they could be updated all the time. And this is even before the public internet was there, before the word intranet existed. We were building essentially intranets. And when it became commercially viable, we're like, hey, we have these skills. We can build these things that everyone wants called websites. And we started building websites. And that's when I started a company as an entrepreneur on the side. And pretty soon I was making more doing that than I was at my day job. And that kind of started the whole pattern of, you know, getting my entrepreneurial footing and really starting what was a career in IT and as an entrepreneur and a businessman.
Excellent. Well, I know that there's a lot more detail there, but this is not a business podcast like you have. Mm-mm. This is a podcast about dads. So for those that want to learn a little bit more about your business career, we'll direct them to your LinkedIn page and put some things in the show notes as far as that's concerned. So you and Dana have been married for 23 years, and I'm sort of curious to know, how did the two of you meet?
We met at the Kentucky Derby. One of my roommates at Allen Bradley, when I first moved up there, had worked for GE in Louisville, Kentucky, and he said, oh, the Derby is a great party. You got to go there. It's wonderful. The girls are very pretty. You'll like it. It's a great big party. And so on the second year of us living together, he convinced me to go down there. And we were supposed to pick up some girl who didn't want to drive the whole way down there from Chicago alone. So we picked her up. Turned out to be the sister of my wife. And we ended up all crashing on my wife's floor. And I woke up one morning and she offered me a strawberry Pop-Tart. And I said, wow, that is just a beautiful woman. And it took us probably 5 years before our lines connected and we started dating. But, you know, there was always a connection from day one, and we knew that we liked each other. But, you know, early on it was, oh, you're not Greek. You live in Kentucky. You live in Milwaukee. How's this ever going to work out? But, you know, it was meant to be.
So let's talk about special needs first on a personal level and then perhaps beyond. So I'm sort of curious, before Spyro was diagnosed, did you or Dana have any experience in the special needs community?
You know, not really. Not really. I know I had an uncle who passed away when I was very young who was, I know he was special needs. I'm not sure exactly the detail, but, you know, he suffered, you know, some mental disabilities, and it was always a very sensitive topic in our household. You know, you had to be very sensitive to making sure you never made fun or said things that could be perceived as making fun of someone with special needs. And it didn't get a lot of detail about it, but there was a sensitivity there from a young age as to mind your manners. We're not all as lucky as you are.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you for sharing. So how did the diagnosis come about, and what was your first reaction?
Well, I mean, it really didn't start with the diagnosis as much as just kind of a series of events that led us down a crazy path to kind of figure it out. Much like my parents, I was an entrepreneur. I was working many hours. I had a company that I was running with several other partners here in the Chicago area. And, you know, for the first 10 years of that company that I was with them, I was working 12-plus-hour days. I was working 6-7 days a week. And, you know, it was the grind, but that was the life I signed up for. So my wife stayed at home with the kids, and we were fortunate to be able to do that. And she's a saint. She's a wonderful woman. She's a caring, loving mother. It just absolute dream of a partner to raise children with, and just a beautiful, caring individual. And I got home from work rather late one night, and I thought the kids would have been in bed already. My son would have been in bed. He was in second grade, and they were at the kitchen table working on some homework. And, you know, second grade homework, what is it? You know, he was trying to write letters out on this manila paper, the kind that's like in landscape format with like the 3 aqua lines, the dotted line in the middle, and they were just writing letters. And he was struggling, and my wife was almost in tears, and I was ready to come home and relax. And she's like, you got to take over. I don't know what's wrong. He's just not getting this. And I sat down with him, and I thought, okay, and I could tell something was up. I mean, this wasn't her normal MO. And I sat down with him for a few minutes and kind of observed him writing. And, his writing was awful. It looked terrible. I tried to show him a few times, and he couldn't repeat the process in the same way each time. And at some point I just realized, listen, nothing good's going to happen tonight. He's in 2nd grade. I told him, I said, listen, buddy, why don't you just go to bed? Let's forget about the homework for now. And he's like, no, but I got to get my homework done. So there was a real strong signal there, because it's like, hey, here's a kid. If he was really not engaged and not wanting to do the work, he wouldn't have been upset that he couldn't complete it. And so I said, oh, don't worry. I'll talk to the teacher. It'll all be okay. You just go to bed. We love you. Everything's fine. Put him to bed, come back down, talk to my wife. And I was like, hey, what's going on? It's like, he just, I don't know if he doesn't want to apply himself or what the story is. He's just not getting it. I don't know what to do. And his handwriting was awful. So I sat down with my computer and opened it up, and I typed into Google, and this is the truth. I said, my son's handwriting sucks is what I typed into Google, and I searched on it. And at the top of the Google search results were these pictures from the Google images. And lo and behold, if we are just lucky, one of the pictures looks exactly, not just like his writing, but like the paper, it was almost the paper we were just looking at. And so, of course, I click on it, and it's this article about this thing called dysgraphia. I'm like, dysgraphia, never heard of it. And it's this, difficulty with writing, difficulty with the fine motor skills to do writing. And so it's interesting because my wife goes like, hey, he always struggled with fine motor skills in preschool and things like that. And I'm like, interesting. So we read this long article, and at the end of the article, it says, oh, by the way, if a child has dysgraphia, they also have dyslexia. Okay. And thankfully, the internet has this hyperlink at the bottom. So we click on dyslexia and read an article on dyslexia. It's like, interesting. Didn't know what it was. Thought it was people seeing things backward. Turns out it's very different than that. Maybe he's dyslexic. Maybe that's the problem. The very last line of that article, there's an interesting thing that says, oh, by the way, if the child is dyslexic, at least one of the parents has dyslexia. She looks at me with these sheepish eyes, because here I am, the guy who got an engineering degree and a master's degree. And she's like, you could just tell in the look in her face. She's like, oh, it's got to be me. Of course, I look back at her and I'm like, oh, it's got to be you. And, which was terrible at the time. But the reality is we read even further and more articles. And I was like, it's me. I'm the one. And, it was little things like dyslexics have trouble learning their multiplication tables. I struggled with that. It was awful. I spent all of 4th grade recess inside trying to learn my multiplication tables. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. It turns out that I don't have well, I guess I've got dysgraphia. My handwriting's terrible. But I also have this dyscalculia thing, which is like I can't do simple arithmetic in my head. So we learned a lot in that evening. And later into the evening, found this website that was super informative. It was by this lady, Susan Barton. I said, wow, we need to find a place where, we can get our son evaluated or get tutoring. And I sent an email. It was probably like, 2 a.m. by this time. We'd read so many articles on this stuff. And I sent an email to Susan Barton. I'm like, oh, maybe we'll hear from her tomorrow. And literally within 5 minutes, I sent her this note. I said, we live in this sleepy little town in the north suburbs of Chicago called Lake Zurich. We're looking for a tutoring center somewhere near us for dyslexia where we can have our son tested. Do you have any recommendations that are within 50 miles? And so she's out in, I think, California somewhere. She sends us an email back in 5 minutes. She's like, oh, Jim, pleasure to meet you. You're in luck. There's one just up the road on Quentin Road, and it's called the Quentin Road Dyslexia Solutions. And I'm like, holy cow. Not only was this lady just on top of this, but we went from awareness of a problem to potential solution and in one evening. And that part of our journey is we're spoiled in that regard because sometimes people take years to even have hope that there's a solution. Now, we didn't know if that was the case with him, but, so many things were adding up with my past and what it said about like adult symptoms and with what my son was going with. And the fact that this place was just up the street from us was literally, it was almost as if like God put his hand on us and said, I'm going to help. It was amazing.
Yeah, well, that is an amazing story. It's almost a miracle, really, when you think about it. Fortunately, it's not like you spent a lot of time in the earlier phase, which in some cases is denial, like there isn't a problem, and then maybe you come to the realization that there is a problem, and then, it's like, well, let's just wait and see. A lot of guys are like, hey, let's cross that bridge when we get there. I'm one of them. And, you were able to, like you said, go from identifying that there's a problem to a potential solution within a very, very short period of time, like nanoseconds almost. So I did a little homework on dyslexia, and I was like stunned to learn that there's between 5 and 15% of Americans, which equates to like 14.5 or 43.5 million children and adults have dyslexia. I'm like, holy moly, I would have had no idea that the problem was that widespread. And it's often associated with learning disabilities, but not always, right? It's not like somebody's got a low level of intellect, but they do have certain things that they just don't connect the dots as easily. And I don't know how to explain it, but you've been through this. And I'm wondering, what were some of the more important decisions you made raising a child that had these dyslexic challenges?
The one thing that happens when a kid is struggling in school and having some type of learning difficulty, and the real challenge with dyslexia is it has no correlation with intellect or IQ. So you can be very smart, you can be not very smart, but dyslexia is going to affect you in either case. And it's something you live with for your entire lifetime. You don't get cured of this. This is just something you learn to cope with and learn to wire your brain around it. We're fortunate that with a lot of cognitive neuroscience now, we understand that brain has tremendous plasticity and it can overcome tremendous things, but sometimes you need to help it reprogram. And so here's an interesting explanation for dyslexia that I always thought resonated with me. Most people have a more dominant side of their brain. So if you're left-brained, you're very, logical. If you're right-brained, you're very creative. And most people have, physically, if they're, left or right brain, one side of the brain is actually much bigger than the other one, and it dominates their thinking. Now, dyslexics have been found to have more equally sized hemispheres of the brain and much more connective tissue between both hemispheres. The reason why that's a liability when you're younger is because if you think about the left side, the more structured, organized side of your brain, it's going to organize things like you would in a computer file system, in folders, all organized, all put away in different areas, categorized, etc. The right side of your brain, the more creative side, it can organize it more like Gmail, okay, more like tags. I'm going to tag this with a smell. I'm going to tag this with an emotion. I'm going to tag this with some sentiment that I've got. And that's how things get organized. Now, if you organize one way consistently all the time, it's easy to recall things. If you recall things, whether it's logical or tagging, Gmail versus, let's say, Outlook, okay, if it's consistent, it's easy to find your email. But if it's inconsistent, it's hard to recall things quickly and reliably. The dyslexic brain, when it's young, files randomly in different ways. So it's hard to recall things. And part of the tutoring mechanism, they use this kind of Orton-Gillingham teaching method, which I'm a big proponent of, is to give ways to allow the brain to wire itself to access information in both manners and in consistent ways, where I might be tagging and filing something at the same time. So that way it's easier for me to recall things. What ends up happening is it's a huge liability when you're younger to learn to read. You're doing things in many cases by memory. And if some of the alphabet is memorized one way and some of it's the other way, it's why just memorizing stuff is just impossible. It seems like an uphill task. As you get older, though, once you wire your way around reading and things like that, the ability to have both the hemispheres of your brain working together becomes a tremendous asset, which is why so many great inventors and so many great entrepreneurs and really powerful people in the world have gonna do great things, have been shown to have dyslexia. The problem is getting from point A to point B, getting through that trough where people tell you you're not smart, where, my son was in reading club, which everyone knew was for the slow kids. And, it wasn't necessarily a club and, the teachers, all well-meaning. I mean, we never met a teacher who wasn't well-meaning, but it say things like, well, your son gets along with everyone else. He's got a great personality. He's so delightful, but when you ask about academic issues, it's just like, oh, he's such a nice boy. He's such a joy.
It's like code words, right? Yeah.
Code words that are basically saying your kid's not lighting it on fire and don't expect too many big things. Okay. Yet many dyslexics, when you speak with them, can be very intelligent and use big words and speak well with even adults. But when they write and when they read, they tend to read, comic books. They tend to read, picture books. They tend to read books with, large print and few words. And they tend to write in ways that defy their ability to communicate verbally. And those are hallmark signs of dyslexics. And the teachers with those kind of coded messages, like, oh, Spyro, are you sure you want to read this in class? Or, they give them that one embarrassing time when they read in front of class and it's just like they stutter, they can't speak, everyone laughs at them. And then, maybe the next time in a kind way, they might say, are you sure you want to speak? Are you okay with that? Or they force them to do it. It just saps kids' confidence. And the big challenge with dyslexic kids is confidence. And when you lose confidence, so many children have to get approval and want to get the respect of their peers, and they do it in different ways. They become a class clown, they become a deviant, they go trying to get attention elsewhere, and that starts a spiral that's negative and downward. And so the key is to recognize kids who need different ways to learn, like this orton-gillingham method, to help them find ways to succeed that are outside of, let's say, the way most of the kids learn. Unfortunately, dyslexia affects such a profound amount of the populace that, we should probably be adopting more of these methods because they work well for everyone. But lack of confidence, I think, is the big driver. And once a kid loses confidence, they're on a negative spiral. And it's been shown, I guess this deep going into the society stuff, that like a large percentage of people in prison are dyslexic. It's a lot of times because they're forced down this path where like school isn't working for me. It doesn't work for me. I don't get approval. So I'm going to go seek approval and, peer acknowledgement in other ways. And I think that's a real misfortune of how our education system is working and how we're serving what is a rather large percentage of the population.
Well, you made reference to something here, and then I can recall from a previous conversation that the school systems aren't really set up to handle dyslexia. It's not treated the same way as, say, ADHD is. And for some reason, maybe I'm giving you attribution and it's not appropriate, but I thought you said in a prior conversation that the school systems in Texas, for some reason, are prepared where many of the school systems around the country aren't.
Well, Texas was an early adopter. So, my son's a junior in college now, and he's been, Dean's List straight A's. I mean, one of the good parts of this story is like, here's a kid who's been getting, like, once we got him tutoring and once he was like near the end of his tutoring, I mean, he's been a model student, straight A's. He excels in college. Texas was one of the states that very early on recognized the importance of recognizing dyslexia, dealing with it, and getting special needs tutoring for people that was appropriate for dyslexia. My wife and I were prepared to move away from my big Greek family at a moment's notice if we couldn't find tutoring facilities nearby us. Thankfully, we found one nearby us. Illinois has since caught up. And so Illinois has gotten much better than it was in the past. There is a lady by the name of Sally Shaywitz at Yale University that has maybe the most profound studies and academic research and investigation into dyslexia. She and her husband are amazing people doing great things there. But at the time, Illinois was lagging, other states were lagging, and Texas was far ahead of the curve. And hopefully more educators get on board with just how important it is for us to deal with this. This affects a really big population. And that's why it's incumbent upon me and people like me to talk about this to make sure more people are aware of it.
Yeah, well, I'm so thankful that you are an outspoken advocate for those with dyslexia like yourself and Spyro. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Orton-Gillingham teaching method.
Well, I mean, the method works like ridiculously well. And it was interesting because the first meeting we had after we started this Orton-Gillingham tutoring, our son was struggling and reading club was doing nothing. Literally, he'd been going to reading club for like a year and had done nothing. And they're like, oh, he's still struggling. It's not doing well. And then we started this tutoring, and one of the tutors said, whatever you're doing at home, keep doing it. Okay. What we were doing was we were paying for Orton-Gillingham tutoring, and it was working, and it seemed to have almost immediate effects.
So I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering what other takeaways come to mind if you were to be able to talk to a young parent, father or mother for that matter, where there might be a suspicion of some learning difficulties associated with dyslexia.
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to own it. The educational system is likely, it's not today geared towards supporting dyslexia. And so you have to own this and you have to take charge. Now, it's not to say that there aren't places where you can get funding if you can't afford the tutoring or you can't find, ways to do this. There's a young mother we've been working with who can't afford the tutoring, but she is learning how to be an Orton-Gillingham tutor on her own. And therefore, she is teaching her son the Orton-Gillingham method, and she's just going through this on her own because she can get access to the materials. And so the reality is there are ways to deal with this. If you own it, your success rates are going to be high. If you outsource this to other people, I think your success rate is probably going to be low in remediating and providing your child with the kind of need they deserve.
So I'm sort of curious to know, why is it you've agreed to be a mentor father as part of the Special Fathers Network?
Well, I mean, it's something I was doing already. All these people that you talk to, and like I said, it's like, I got super lucky. I mean, we figured this thing out pretty quick. Everything kind of fell in our lap. We didn't have anything keeping us from being able to afford or do anything else. And you wonder, why did that happen? And so you say, you got to pay it back somehow. And to think about all these kids who are being told they're dumb, okay, are being told they're not good enough when they are, to say that they don't have the motivation or the drive. They do. What you want to do is make sure they don't expend that energy in something that's counterproductive for their future, that's counterproductive for society, because they probably could be awesome at something. They just have to be given a chance. And, why wouldn't you give back to help provide better outcomes?
Yeah, well, thank you for being part of the team. We're thrilled to have you. Let's give a special shout out to our mutual friend, Larry Kaufman.
Yeah.
One of our LinkedIn Lion friends, for helping connect us years and years ago.
Yeah, very, very thankful to Larry. He's a wonderful guy. He's got a great book, by the way, called The NCG Factor, that talks about networking and how you can build strong, profound networks that help you prosper in business, but make great connections between good people. And this is one of them.
Well, thanks for plugging his book. It is a really good one. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, to all the people who listen to this podcast, for whatever reason, keep the faith, keep your confidence, because people are depending on you.
Great words of advice. So if somebody wants to learn more about dyslexia, Susan Barton, the Orton-Gillingham method, maybe your podcast, or just to contact you, what would be the best way of doing that?
Well, anyone can contact me, but my email is jim@rafti, RAFTI.com. I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone about this. Susan Barton's website and her information is fantastic. I think her company is Bright Solutions for Dyslexia. If you look up Susan Barton, you'll find a million videos that she's done. She's an amazing woman. I have profound respect for her. And, I think there's so many great resources out there today. I mean, just, put the time in, do the Google searches. It's all out there.
Jim, thank you for the time and many insights. As a reminder, Jim is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for taking the time and listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Please consider making a tax-deductible donation. I would really appreciate your support. Jim, thanks again.
Thank you, David. You're the best. Appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
And thank you for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for fathers to support fathers. Go to 21stcenturydads.org. That's 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like us on Facebook and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. The Dad to Dad podcast is produced by Couch Audio for the Special Fathers Network. Thanks for listening.